So let's continue from here. This figure shows the import and export of goods and services of the US. So here, the light blue is the import, and the one below is the export. Okay, as we have already seen the data, we have seen that US has higher import than export. Okay, but if you can see the pattern, the pattern is almost similar, but we have higher imports and lower exports. So we can say United States has a negative trade balance, or it is in trade deficit. Okay, so I would like to share you this website. So I want you to check it anytime you like. So let me share you this. So this is the website I would like to show you. Then it is OEC World, or it is the Observatory of Economic Complexity. So this is a website where you can see the import and export of a country. Okay, all the details about import and export you can see from this website. What you can do is you just click on countries. Okay, so there are several countries, almost all the countries in the world except few. Their data is already here, and after you click on countries, you click here on search. Then after search, you can just type, for example, South Korea. Okay, so when you type South I think the website's busy. Always wait a little bit. So let's search again. Oh, sorry for that. This, I think it became very busy. So anyways, you just type here South Korea, then you can see what type of products South Korea imports and what type of product is South Korea. Yeah, okay, we have it here now. So you have here South Korea, then you click, for example, or you can click on the United States and other countries too. So you can see here, for example, it says South Korea is the 5th largest export economy in the world and the 6th most complex economy according to the Economic Complexity Index, ECI, right? And you can read here that it says Korea has a trade balance of $124 billion. So that is a positive trade balance, right? So from this, we can understand that Korea's export is higher than Korea's import, okay? So we can say Korea has a trade surplus, okay? Then you can read other details also, but I'll show you the visualization here. There are so many visualization. Your computer might be a little bit busy because this visualization takes data from different databases. Then it creates this visualization of products, and how much they are exported, and it also creates a graph of this import and export, okay, of every product that Korea trades with the world. Okay, so this is the export. So you'll read some details. For example, the most recent exports are led by integrated circuits. Okay, so Korea's highest export is export is dominated by integrated circuits. Okay, followed by cars. So the first products that Korea exports are integrated circuits. Next are cars. Okay, and you can also read the imports here. So the most recent imports of Korea are led by crude petroleum, probably from the US. Okay, and followed by integrated circuits. So you can see that integrated circuits are the highest import and export of Korea. Okay, so maybe Korea imports integrated circuits, then does add some value, then exports or sell it to other countries. Okay, so this is the importance. So as I've said, this is a visualization. So this is a place where the graphs are displayed. So it's taking time because this is a huge processing. So I will get back to this, but let's continue talking about the trade balance here. Okay, so this shows the import and export of the US, and US has a negative trade balance here. Okay, so you can see here that US trade by industry in 2011. So electronic products imported to Korea was $401 billion, exports was $165 billion. So the trade balance is negative again. So this is a total volume of trade. Okay, so transportation equipments, energy related products, chemicals and related products, minerals and related products. These are the amount of imports and exports in 2011, but you can see that the trade balance is still negative, right? So these are the US exporters gross total, all industries to the world by states. So this is from Texas, California, New York, Illinois, and Florida, maybe. Okay, so these are the states, and this shows the export of this the export of products from these states. Okay, so who trades with whom? The total exports. Okay, so you can see that the total Texas exports are 2,048 billion, which is 16.5 of all the US exports. And the highest of all states, California, has 165 billion, and New York has 83 billion. Okay, so it's just how much of products are exported from different states within the US. Okay, so I will leave this here. For example, here, the top destinations for Texas exporters are Mexico, Canada, and China. So as we have said, the US has the highest trading volume with Mexico, Canada, and China. And as you can see, even states within the US have the highest trade with these three countries specifically. Right? So compared to US, Texas exports the larger share of its output, depends on exports for more of its jobs, sends more sophisticated products overseas, and employs the highest skilled workers in export related jobs. Okay, so let's just leave this here, and let's start the size matters theory of the gravity model. Okay, so let me check if the website has finished downloading. So it is still working, but I advise you to check this at your home. Just type OEC World, then you'll find this website. Then you can type a country, then you can check its export, see its import. Then around here, you will see the trade balance graph, okay? The amount of export and import. Okay, so as I've said last week, it is crucial that a country should keep its import and export balanced, because when export is very high, it is we will have a bad relationship with other countries, or because you might be devaluing your currency and your value of your currency is very low. That means when you have higher export. Okay, but anyways, the trade, I mean the export and import should be balanced, which means if you are exporting $20 billion worth of goods, then probably it should be around 20 billion that you should import from other countries. Then you have a zero trade balance, or you might have a slightly positive trade balance. Okay, so so let's talk about the size matters, the gravity model. So gravity model is the analogy of Newton's third law of motion. So most of you might have heard about the Newton's law. So it's just like that. Okay, so according to this Newton law of gravity, so they say the gravitational attraction between any two objects is proportional to its mass and dimensions with distance. So it is kind of copied from the Newton's law of gravity and applied in the economics. Okay, so gravity model states that country with a big size of economy will have a big international trade. That is the point. Okay, so if you see the 3 of the top 10 trading partners with the US are the Germany, United Kingdom, and France. Okay, in Europe, in North America, with North America and South America, we have this NAFTA. But the 3 largest trading partners in Europe with the US are Germany, United Kingdom, and France. And if you see, these 3 are the largest economies in Europe. Okay, so the largest economy, or the size of your economy and the international trade you have with the other country is dependent on your size of economy. Okay, so which means the US has more trades with a country which has a highest GDP or highest economy. Okay, so why does the United States trade more with these European countries than the others? So these countries have the largest GDP and the value of goods and services produced in an economy in Europe. Okay, so each European country shares of US trade with Europe is roughly equal to the shares of the European GDP. Okay, so the amount of trade the US has is proportional to the economy, the size of economy of the countries. Okay, so as we have already explained, GDP is gross domestic product, and it is GDP is equal to consumption plus capital investment plus government spending plus net export. Okay, and when a country has the highest GDP, then it trades with another country which has a highest GDP or which has the same economic status. Okay, that is the theory of gravity model. Okay, so if you can see here, these are countries in Europe, and this graph shows the trade or the size of European economies and the value of their trade with the United States. Okay, as I've said, Germany, United Kingdom, and France are the biggest economies in Europe, and they are the ones which has the highest trade with the United States. You can see here, Poland, Sweden, Austria, this has lowest GDPs, and their trade with the US is also lower as compared to those countries with highest GDP or with the big economy. Okay, so this gravity model states that international trade and the size of economy are proportional. Okay, that is a simple explanation for the gravity model. So the size of an economy is directly related to the volume of imports and exports. Okay, larger economies produce more goods and services, so they have more to sell in export market. Okay, that's the point. So when you have the highest GDP, as you've said, one of the factors that affect GDP is the net export. Okay, that's export minus import. Okay, so when a country has, when we say a country has highest GDP, it means that the country has the highest import and exports. Okay, so larger economies generate more income from the goods and services sold, so they are able to buy more imports. Okay, so when a country has more exports, which means now more money is coming to the country, so the living standard of these people within this country is high. So when you have people with high living standard, they buy products, high quality products from other countries, so now the import of the country increases. Okay, so import increase means, let me explain this simple. Okay, when we say import to a country increases, it means that the living in the standard of this country is increasing, right? Because now the people are able to buy products from other countries. Okay, so when you have high exports, then you sell and you have money, then which means you buy more as importers to your country, because now you have a very good living standard, right? So trade between any two countries is larger. So the larger is either country. Okay, when there is a large trade between two countries, so either of this or both are big economic countries. For example, US has the highest trade with China. This shows either one of this or both of them have the highest economy. Okay, so as you've said, the US is the highest economy, followed by China, right? That explains why US has the highest trade with China, because China is the second biggest economy in the world, right? So which means, for example, if Germany is the next largest economy, then US would have the highest trade volume with Germany. Okay, that's so how can we calculate gravity model? So trade between two countries is calculated as A times the GDP of one of the countries times the GDP of the other country, divided by the distance between these two countries. Okay, so this, I guess, is simple. So A is constant, so let's just leave A, but YI means the GDP of one of the countries. For example, if you are talking about China and the US, and we want to calculate the value of trade between China and the US, then we say the value of trade between China and the US is equal to constant A times the GDP of China times the GDP of America, divided by the distance between these two countries. So this will tell you the trade volume between two countries. Okay, so you can take this simple calculation to know the value of trade between two countries. Okay, but more generally, you can also use A, B, and C, where A, B, and C should not be one, but this is more general method of calculating. But let's stick with this one. Okay, trade value between two countries is equal to a constant times the GDP of one of the countries times the other one, divided by the distance between the countries. Okay, So if I give you GDP of the US, GDP of China, and the distance between those two countries, then you can calculate the value of trade between China and the US, okay? So looking for anomalies in gravity model, okay? There are some anomalies actually, so it's not perfect. This gravity model is not a perfect explanation of volume of trade between two countries, okay? Because there are some exceptions. So a gravity model fits the data on US trade with European countries well, but not perfectly, okay? Why? For example, here, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Ireland trade much more with the United States than predicted by the gravity model. So when you calculate the trade value between the US and Netherlands, for example, so using the calculation, you might say the GDP of the Netherlands multiplied by the GDP of the US divided by the distance between the Netherlands and the US. But the value computed by this gravity model is not perfect, or it's not the right value. So this shows that there must be another explanation why this gravity model doesn't predict the trade value, trade volume between the US and Netherlands very well, as it explains trade volume with other countries, okay? So this might be because there are other factors than the size of the economy that affects international trade, okay? So far, we talked about international trade being affected by the size of the economy of the country. But the other factor here is the cultural affinity. Ireland has cultural affinity with the US, okay? So most of you might know that millions, more than 10 million US citizens, they came from, or they have migrated from Ireland, right? So there is a strong cultural relationship between Ireland and the US. So, and due to common language and history of migration, Ireland and the US have more trade value than expected, okay? So it's not only the distance that determines the trade or the economy that determines the trade, but the cultural affinity with or between countries might also affect the international trade, right? So the other is the Netherlands and Belgium have transport cost advantage due to their location. So it's not about culture, it's not about the size of the economy, but only because Netherlands and Belgium are close to the US export, or it's easy to export to these two countries because of transportation cost, then the trade volume between these two countries is bigger, okay? So even though gravity model explains the trade volume between two countries using this computation, there are some anomalies or some mistakes, or it might not predict very well because the international trade might also be affected by cultural affinity, transportation cost, distance, okay, and other factors. So these are some of the impediments to trade: distance, barriers, and borders. Borders could also be barriers to international trade, okay? So other things besides size matters for trade. Distance, as we have said, because when a country is very far away, for example, it's easy for South Korea to export its products to close by countries, for example, to Japan or to the Philippines, than exporting its products to Europe or Africa, right? Because Europe and Africa are very far, so which means when the transportation cost is high, the price of these products will be high, and if the price of these products are high, then these products might not compete very well in the market in Africa or in Europe, because there could be similar products that are exported to Europe or Africa from the closest countries, okay? Then distance between markets influence transportation cost, and therefore the cost of imports and exports. Okay, and the other barrier is the cultural affinity. Close cultural ties, such as common language, usually leads to a strong economic ties, just like with Ireland and the US. Okay, the other is geography. Ocean harbors and a lack of mountain barriers may make the transportation and trade easier. Okay, so the geographic location of a country might also affect the trade between the two countries. Okay, so if there is an ocean and there is an easy transport between these two countries, then international trade will improve. This means besides the size of the economy of the country. Okay, and the other is multinational corporations. So what companies do is usually, for example, there is a company in Korea that sells its products to its customers in Africa or in Europe. Okay, but since transporting these goods from Korea to Europe or Korea to Africa has a high transportation cost, as I've said, the prices would be high, and it is very difficult to compete with a high price in the market. So what companies usually does is they open this same companies in Africa and in Europe, which means they produce their products in Africa, okay, so that they can sell to their customers in Africa. They will open the same company in Europe, and they sell to their customers in Europe. So we say this company is now multinational corporation because now this company is operating outside its borders. Okay, so the parent company could be in Korea, but this company has its branches or its companies in Africa and Europe. So we say it has a multinational corporation. And if a company is a multinational corporation, then to sell and this products to nearby countries will be easy. Okay, so corporations spread across different nations, import and export many goods between their divisions. The other one is borders. Crossing borders involves formalities that take time, right? So, for example, there is a border between US and Canada, right? So, but there are some states that are close to, that are states of the US, but close to Canada. And there are also the states in Canada, but close to the US border, okay? But still, the trade between, let's say, I'll show you the map. So let's finish this. Crossing borders involves some formalities, right? And these formalities take time, and often different currencies need to be exchanged because when, for example, Mexico and the US are not using the same currency. Mexico is using peso, the US is using dollars, right? So we need to exchange the currencies, and perhaps monetary costs like tariffs will be there, but maybe because of free trade, they would not be tariffs. But there are other formalities that take time. So I will show you how borders affect trade in the next slide. Okay. So there is an estimate that the effect of distance from the gravity model predicts that 1% increase in the distance between two countries is associated with a decrease in volume of trade of about 0.7 to 1%. So if there is 1% distance, then the trade between these two countries decreased by 1%. When there is 50% increase in distance between two countries, there will be 50% decrease, almost approximately 50% decrease in international trade volume between these two countries. Okay, so as countries are located very far away from each other, their international trade also be less and less. Okay, besides distance, borders increase the cost and time needed to trade. So trade agreements between countries are intended to reduce the formalities and tariffs needed to cross borders, and therefore to increase trade. So we're talking about World Trade Organization, right? So as we said last time, World Trade Organization is there to control the trade between nations, right? So that's the only job of World Trade Organization. So when we say to control this trade, they set rules, and these rules are agreements among the members of the WTO, right? So in the world, there are about 195 nations or countries, right? Out of this 195, the active ones are 193, right? Because we don't count the Palestine and the Holy See, right? Anyways, from 193, 164 of these countries are members of the WTO, and about 23 of them or 24 of them are observatories, okay? And they have asked to be member of WTO, but still pending. My point here is there are agreements which are signed by the members of the WTO. And WTO is trying to make trade free of tariffs or non-tariff barriers, okay? So for example, free trade agreement is one of the agreements in the WTO. So free trade agreement means countries can trade without being imposed by any tariffs, okay, on the products. So when there is a free trade agreement, then the amount of trade volume between the countries increases, right? And for example, the US has signed a free trade agreement with Mexico and Canada in 1994. So this is called NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. And as NAFTA, as for the NAFTA, after these three countries have signed this agreement, NAFTA, their trade volume has increased significantly. And it's not, and this increase of trade between these countries has also contributed a lot to the growth of the economies of these three countries. Okay, so if you can see the website I just showed you, that is OEC World, you can see that Canada and Mexico has about 14 and 13% import and export with the US. Okay, that is the largest next to China. Okay, so because NAFTA and because Mexico and Canada are close to the US, the amount of trade between the US and its northern and southern neighbors as a fraction of GDP is larger than between the US and European countries. So if you compare the trade, apart from the free trade agreement, this US, Canada, and Mexico are very close to each other, right? They are borders. Because of their distance, this has also helped. The distance is not that far between these two, between these three countries. So that has also helped to increase the trade volume between these countries. So Canada's economy is roughly the same size as Spain's, but US has less trade volume with Spain than Canada, because Canada is very close to the US, okay? So you can see here. So this is a trade volume between the US and the European countries, and this is a trade volume between the US and its neighbors, Canada and Mexico. And you can see that it is very high as compared to its European counterparts, right? So again, let's continue with the barriers to trade. Yet even with a free trade agreement between the US and Canada, which use a common language, the borders between these two countries still seems to be associated with reduction in trade. So we have said distance is a factor, and the trade between the US and Canada was good because they are very close to each other, but still they have borders within each other. Again, if you compare trade within the states within the US, for example, Texas with California or with another state, it is higher as compared to trade with Texas and a state in Canada. So because even though, for example, even though Texas is very close to one of the states in Canada and very far from another state in the US, the distance doesn't contribute to higher volume of trade because of the border. Okay, so some border limitations are also factors to impede international trade. So the data shows that there is much more trade between pairs of Canadian provinces, than between Canadian provinces and the US state, even when holding distance constant. So this estimates indicate that the US-Canadian border deters trade as much as if the countries were very far apart from each other. So you can see here. So this in the north is the US, right? And I mean, this is the US, the blue one, and this in the north is Canada, right? So for example, number 2 and number 2 here. So Montana and this, okay, these are US states and these are Canadian provinces, right? So for example, Alberta and Washington. Alberta and Washington are very close with each other, right? So Washington and New York, number 1 and number 5, are very far from each other, right? So the distance between these two states is very far. So New York is very close to Alberta than Washington, but still the trade between New York and Washington is higher than the trade between New York and Alberta. Washington and Alberta here because of some border issues. Okay, so I'll be back again after 5 minutes. Okay, we'll be back with these issues. Okay.